welcome to this month's edition of Slugger TV. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the recent debate around Irish unification. Most importantly, the comments of former First Minister Peter Robinson in his newsletter column. Also comments by our current First Minister, Arlene Foster, on RTE. And we're also going to be looking at some of the recent developments around the Centenary debate. And to go through these fascinating topics, we have the political commentators, Tim Cairns and Sarah Creighton. You're both very welcome to this month's edition of Slugger TV. Tim, I want to start with you. So I'm going to start with the current leader of Unionism, the current First Minister. She was speaking to Tommy Gorman on RTE the other day, and she made comments. Now, these aren't particularly new comments for her. She has said this before to Paddy Keelty in a documentary, but she said, you know, if there was ever a United Ireland, she would be off to England. And again, this has provoked a lot of commentary on social media. So I just wanted to get your thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think things are a lot more complicated than just probably leaving due to some sort of referendum result. I mean, I think people have family and property and all of those sorts of things tied up here. So, but I don't think that the comments are just quite as absurd as what people's reaction to them have been. I think quite a lot of unionists would hold that view, that they would feel more comfortable were they to move from Northern Ireland to England, Scotland or Wales if there was an All Ireland. I mean, the simple fact in this debate, and nobody really talks about it, if there was to be an all tomorrow, there wouldn't be any unionists. So people say we want to make unionists feel comfortable within a new Ireland. Well, there wouldn't be any unionists at all, because it's loyalty to the union, it's loyalty to the Crown, it's wanting to see Northern Ireland be the best that it can be within the United Kingdom. So if that was to be removed, it's not like we would be having a referendum in 7 years' time to return Northern Ireland to the United Kingdom. That's gone. Unionism's over. There is no unionism. So the very identity of a unionist would be gone. So I can understand why some people would say, well, if all that I cherish and all that is culturally mine and all that is within my identity is gone overnight, then I would rather move to a place that was going to culturally respect who I am and where I can continue to be a unionist. So that makes perfect sense when you put it in that context.
When I hear those comments, it does genuinely make me feel sad that someone would feel that they would have to leave. Like, you know, so for example, even though I'm on the opposite end of the debate, I live in Northern Ireland, which is in the United Kingdom, and you know, I stick around here. So
you're doing very well and being very prosperous, David.
But what about you? What have you ever thought about? I mean, I know you've had experience over in Canada. Would you ever feel compelled, if that ever happened, to maybe return to Canada or something like that?
Well, I think certainly, I mean, you know, to answer it in the most personal way possible, I think it would, you know, these questions are going to be answered by where your kids settle, aren't they? I mean, I think if down the line my children were to go to university in Scotland or Canada and they were to remain there, if there was an All Ireland, I think it would certainly make the decision easier to go to Canada or to go to Scotland or to go to Wales or wherever it is in the world, Australia or wherever it is. You know, my children happen to have decided to live their lives. Now, if they were to remain here in Northern Ireland and they were saying they didn't want to leave and they have families and we have grandkids, I mean, who knows? I mean, my goodness, we're looking way into the future. My kids are 13 and 11. You know, you're more likely to stay here because these things, you know, family ties, you know, you can't divorce culture from family, from property, from, you know, the life you've built. You know, there's a lot in the mix, not just culture.
Okay. Sarah, what did you make of Arlene's comments to start off with to Tommy Gorman on RT?
Yeah, as you said yourself, it's something she said before to Paddy Keelty a couple of years ago. So it wasn't, she was just restating that. And there was a debate about those comments when she made them at the time. And I wrote an article about it. And I kind of feel the same way. You know, I think one thing I think we should take into account when people say these things is there's trauma as well for a lot of people in Northern Ireland. And particularly for some people that have lived through the Troubles on both sides, but particularly, we're talking about unionists right now, particularly people who suffered during the Troubles. United Ireland is quite a frightening prospect for a number of reasons, you know, and it's the reason why a lot of violence happens. So for some people, the idea of a United Ireland is very, very frightening. So I don't think it's ridiculous, as Tim says, it's not a ridiculous thing to say. It is a sad thing for her to say, and the idea that she would feel like she'd want to leave. I do know people that would feel the same. Mm-hmm. I know other people that wouldn't. I mean, leaving Northern Ireland is not a choice that everybody has. People have jobs here, property here, lives here, you know, other people just can't get up and leave. But obviously, I think, you know, many people do leave Northern Ireland. They leave every single year for various different reasons that have nothing to do with the constitutional question. And certainly, you know, I think a lot of people would maybe stick around in United Ireland if it worked out badly. They maybe would leave at some point. So I think, when we're coming to that, when I'm talking about this, I am aware of the complexities of this, maybe for Arlene Foster, and given that what she's been through. But I do think that some things she did say were a bit problematic. I understand Tim's point, and I take Tim's point that, when United Ireland happens, your unionism is very much gone, because that option is no longer there. But at the same time, if it does happen, I think people within unionism will be looking for leadership, particularly from unionists who feel very much represented by Arlene Foster. So the idea that she would leave and maybe almost abandon people to that, I think, is quite problematic. Not everybody can do that. The idea that we, once United Ireland happened, that it's a one-way ticket out and that's it. That is correct at the current time. But I mean, I know that other unionists have maybe mentioned, well, maybe we need a right to go back. Maybe that does need to be included in any type of negotiations for United Ireland, in which case you would say that maybe somebody needs to be there to make that case and say, actually, we should have the right to go back to Britain. I did think it was a wee bit problematic when she said, that she wouldn't feel as British within United Ireland. Now, obviously, I get that to a certain extent, because obviously Britishness is tied with Northern Ireland, and if that disappears, people will feel like they've lost that, and like they've lost that link with Britain. But I did wonder, and I did see somebody say, a friend of mine said, well, has she ever thought about people within Northern Ireland who feel Irish? Has she taken that into consideration when she thinks that herself? And obviously that's very genuinely held belief. But I did find that a wee bit problematic when she said that. I do think maybe I would like to know more about what she thinks about that and where that comes from.
Yeah, and again, I hope this isn't too personal, Sarah, but what about yourself? I mean, if a border poll did come in and it was yes, would you consider your position in North? Because it is something we don't think about. I mean, and that's equally true for nationals. If a border poll happens and it's no, and that's the debate settled for a good long, I know the Good Friday Agreement says at least 7 years, but it could be, if you look at Quebec, it was 15 years in between the European referendum was 40 years. So what about yourself?
I know I would stick about just to see what happened. To be honest, I have a job here and family here, it would be very difficult to up sticks and leave for me. But that's not to say that if something happened and it was pretty bad and maybe things took a sour turn, that I maybe wouldn't think about it in the same way that, members of my family left during the height of the Troubles and went to America and went to Holland and everything else. But, I'd initially know I'd like to stick around and see what happens. I'd like to stick about and see what comes next, and see whether, is Jamal still going to end up sitting in the Dáil with the Healy Rays? I'd like to at least see if that happens first of all. But yeah, I wouldn't be going anywhere.
Okay. Tim, just want to ask you about, I was very intrigued by, the debate around it. And I appreciate, again, we can't rely on social media, because social media is the worst barometer for how actual, genuine, everyday people respond to things. But there was some juvenile commentary about Arlene's comments about, the old usual things about, oh, great, here's the billboard. I saw one tweet saying, great, there's the billboard for the Yes campaign sorted out, and a couple of other derogatory comments. I mean, is this really the tone that we think that'll be a border poll just writ large? Do we think that this is ultimately, I mean, regardless of lofty aspirations that some of us may have for the debate, do you think it will pretty quickly descend down into that?
I think if that's the level that it sinks to, we'll be pretty lucky, because I think it'll be much worse than that. I mean, I've heard others in the media, and I think it was a Belfast Telegraph editorial was saying, you could find a mini civil war at the time of a border poll. So I think that there is, if it's just bad taste jokes on Twitter, I think that we'll be getting away with it pretty lightly. I think that in any run up to any referendum, when it happens, is going to be something that's going to be hugely problematic for the community, hugely problematic for society. I think there'll be tensions will be beyond what we can even imagine within society at that point in time. I think there will be the potential, at the very least, for street violence. And whether that happens or whether that doesn't happen, I think we'll be very lucky, by the grace of God, if there is no street violence at that point in time, because I just think there's probably tensions are going to be so high it's going to be inevitable, and I think tensions will be whipped up by politicians on both sides, and I think there will be very unhelpful rhetoric, and I think it'll be a horrendous couple of years to live through in this part of the world, whatever the result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just, I mean, I hate to go back to your experience in Canada. They seem to be able to have these debates. I appreciate you weren't there during the two referenda there in Quebec, but they seem to be able to have that debate within the realms of legal. I mean, there were some tense moments, but so I mean, is that beyond us here?
Well, I think the difference between Quebec, the Quebec debate, and the debate here is, Quebec, apart from a small part of Northern Ontario, there aren't many French Canadians outside of that area. So I think, that the issue is very much contained geographically. I mean, if you live in Western Canada in the way that I did, you very rarely meet a French Canadian. And so it always interested me, the further you go west, the more they hated French Canadians, but yet the more they thought they were liberal and right on. So it was always a very interesting tension. But I think in Canada it was very different to here. There wasn't any levels of violence the way we had here. The issue is very much self-contained within one province, towards the east of Canada. So it was very much a very different debate. And I think the Scottish debate is very different as well, because it doesn't have that shadow of violence behind it. So I think our referendum's unique. There's things we can learn from other parts of the world. I mean, I think what both sides need to learn perhaps from Quebec is, if there's a very narrow victory or a very narrow defeat, it's just accept it and move on, which the Canadians did, I think, very well. But I wonder, will we be mature enough here to accept it, whatever way it falls? Because I would imagine if it's a very narrow majority for staying within the United Kingdom, there will just be huge and horrendous pressure coming from Republicans and Nationalists to run the referendum again and keep running it until they get the result that they want. So I think for all of us, I think, if the referendum happens, I think we all need to be prepared for the consequences of what that's going to bring. And I think, we all need to be prepared to be mature in terms of what any result would be.
Yeah, and of course, Good Friday Agreement means that there can't be for at least 7 years.
That's right.
Another go around. So whatever outcome we get, I mean, we're locked into it for at least 7 years.
But the campaign for the next referendum in 7 years will begin the day after.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Sarah, what about you? I mean, are you, because I know you've been you've been engaged in the past week, and we'll get on to some of the discussions that were happening last week. What have you made of some of the tone? And again, health warning: Twitter is not the real world. We get that, but what have you made of some of the tone?
Obviously, Twitter is not real life, so I only really have seen Twitter, to be honest, just given that we're not out speaking to people or anybody like that. But it's been quite mixed. Some people, I think, struck the right tone and kind of said, they were a bit sad about this. And, other people maybe wrote some reflective tweets and pieces about where she was coming from or what they thought about things that she'd said. You did get a few people that have just been a bit idiotic and a bit triumphalist, which is a bit sad and very off-putting. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's reflective of everybody who's involved in that debate, though no doubt that attitude is there with some people. I think, thankfully, there are people that I've spoken to that don't get on like that do genuinely, would like Arlene Foster to stay in Northern Ireland if there's United Ireland, and are quite willing to listen to her concerns. I think that's the attitude that needs to be taken. But I think I do agree with Tim, if a referendum is called, one of my fears is that it's called, I mean, at any point, I think it's going to be disruption. I think it is going to be very stressful. I do think there's going to be a lot of anger there. The potential for violence is high. If it's not handled well, the potential for violence is there in any case. But I think if it's really not handled well, that could happen. But I do fear a referendum being called into circumstances where we're not prepared for it, or it's called for very political reasons. And I know, obviously, that the Good Friday Agreement says that it can't be called, or the Secretary of State has to be rigorously impartial when they call the border poll. But, I do worry about somebody just calling this a discretionary poll as opposed to a mandatory one. A discretionary poll in particular, I do worry that it can be boycotted. I do worry that if people think it is called for the wrong reasons, that people would not get involved with that. The difference between a discretionary poll and a mandatory poll is important to draw that distinction, because a mandatory poll is called if it looks likely the United Ireland is possible. So that outcome is factored into the mandatory polls, into the consideration of the Secretary of State when they make that call. And obviously it's 50+1, that is the legal requirement. But I understand why some people say that aspirationally maybe it should be, they would like to get it higher than that if they could. Obviously, I think both sides would like that. I think the pro-union side would like to get higher than 51% as well. We would like to get 60, maybe 70% rather than that. But I do worry about the impact of a referendum being called at the wrong time, and people not being taken into consideration, other people's views not being taken into consideration. And I suppose the worry is that debate actually makes it worse in Northern Ireland, that we have to make sure that whatever happens, if that referendum is called, that we do not allow society to be destroyed even further. But that is a very, very difficult thing.
Yeah, it is good, and you're right about how it's handled, and about, you know, well, the thing about referenda is once you call them, you can have these great ideas, and then if that's David Cameron found with the Brexit referendum, even with the Scottish referendum, how quickly he lost control of both debates, and the result in Scotland, even though it was what he wanted, was a lot closer than many people thought it was going to be. Sarah, I want to stick with you because you have been foraying across the border, making your case for the union, and you've been on a couple of platforms. I just wanted to get, because it is interesting, because, you know, the South really does seem to be picking up on this debate, and this debate has largely, until fairly recently, been confined to Northern Ireland, as Tim's Quebec analogy there. But the South seems to be picking up on it. Again, you were on Clareburn Live the other week. High-profile guest, the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, leader of the opposition. And you gave your musings, and you've also appeared on the journal.ie as well. What have you made of your views being put towards a Southern audience and the feedback you've got from that? What have you made of that?
It's been interesting, to say the least. You know, Clareburn was very interesting. It was, you know, it was in and out a couple of minutes. It was about the article I'd written for the Journal. You know, there's a lot of people in the South who are very interested in what Unionists and Loyalists think. They're quite keen to hear those perspectives. And, you know, I know Newton Emerson and Alex Kane have written for the Southern papers for a very long time, but they are quite keen to hear new voices, particularly from young people. I know there's a Shared Islands unit as well, which I've been involved in. So I have found more of a receptive ear than I probably would have thought beforehand. You know, I do think people are quite willing to listen. But at the same time, you know, I do think some people in the South aren't really ready for Unionist opinions and Loyalist opinions. I do think some people like to be told what they want. They want to be told what they want to hear in some cases, not always, but I do think that is there. Certainly, I think some people aren't used to hearing opinions from Northern Ireland, not just from Unionists and Loyalists, but also from Nationalists in Northern Ireland as well. So, you know, for instance, I wrote that article about for the Journal. It was about, you know, about Unionist opinion for United Ireland and taking that into consideration. And then I did a wee video with them as well, and made a comparison between Fianna Gael and Fianna Fáil. And I said, you know, if there was a coalition, they might go into government with the DUP. Got quite a bit of blowback from that, which I've never had before, which was quite interesting, and people were quite taken aback with it. And I get it, you know, people might think it's a pretty, I think when people heard that, they thought, oh my goodness, she's saying that they agree with the DUP in all these different positions, but I didn't mean that at all. I got quite a bit of pushback from that from Neil Richmond in the Fine Gael and somebody else as well, which was deeply amusing. I've never had angry Fine Gaelers, as I mentioned before, but here turns out they're really, really angry when you make those points. I had nobody from Fianna Fáil or the DUP. It was all Fine Gael. It's really funny. But no, I think it has been a positive experience, but I do think people have certain ideas about Unionists and Loyalists in Northern Ireland, and I think some people do want to be told what they want. They want to be told what they want to hear, I think, and I do think there is a constituency down there that does want to listen, I think. But I think it's just about finding them and just making sure that you're talking to the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim, what have you made of? I know you have limited interest, to say the least, about Southern politics. But what have you made about the fact that this debate does seem to be kind of, you know, going across the island, and it is getting higher prominence in the South than it was hitherto? Well, what have you made of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly, I think there's more Southern politicians engaging in the debate now, which is interesting. I think probably Brexit has opened up that space for that debate to take place, and I think that's probably what's driven greater prominence in the debate, because, you know, I think all of these things are all intertwined. Brexit, the Northern Ireland Protocol, where's Ireland's place within Europe, where's Northern Ireland's place within Europe and within the United Kingdom. So I think all of these debates are intertwined, but it has been interesting to see that there's been a much higher level engagement of Southern politicians in this, because I do think, you know, the certain sense I have is that they're probably, there's this romantic notion of an all-Ireland. It's sort of like Joe Biden does an all-Ireland. There's this romantic notion of the old country and a bit of diddly-dee music playing, and we're all happy and hugging together, and we'll have cabbage and corned beef. And there's that certain sense of that kind of Americanization of the romantic all-Ireland. And I think in a certain sense of, there is that romantic sense in the Republic of Ireland. But I think once they get to the finer points of what that might mean, I mean, people keep on saying the United Kingdom doesn't want us, but I think there's a lot of people in the Republic of Ireland who would vote for an all-Ireland, not really because they want to, because they think they have this romantic notion of what it could be. I get the feeling that Irish Republicans and nationalists need to maybe realise that there's a lot of people in the Republic of Ireland don't want them either.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you think, Tim, on what you've seen, I mean, obviously it seems to be Gregory Campbell seems to be the unionist emissary he's
the outreach worker
to deal with these debates, and he does seem to be. I mean, I heard him on with Jim O'Callaghan on Talkback, having an engagement with him. The Fianna Fáil TD he also was dispatched to Claire Byrne. I mean, in terms of putting that face forward, I mean, Gregory's not behind the door in his views. I mean, is that the best face to unionism, or does unionism really? I suppose, because here's the thing: do unionists don't really need to focus on a Southern audience really to move their agenda, I suppose.
No, well, in terms of Southern audience, no. I mean, there's no the Southern audience isn't going to advance anything for unionism. I mean, the Republic of Ireland will vote for reunification, or they won't. In many ways, that's kind of irrelevant to where we're at. So I think in terms of Gregory. I think, well, I don't know, the bits I've heard of what Gregory's been has been very positive. It's been a very useful contribution. I think he's really put the unionist case well. That and I think something that Gregory has been saying, I think that I hope is starting to resonate with people. Is people who are proponents of an all-Ireland keep on saying, well, it's fine, your Britishness will be respected. We'll make room for your Britishness within an all-Ireland. But the fact is, under the Belfast Agreement, your Irishness is fully respected. To be Irish is fully respected. You can be an Irish citizen. You can express your Irish identity and culture. So it's fully respected on the Belfast Agreement. So why are you asking me to accept something that is a reality for you right now that you're rejecting? And I think that's been a very important contribution in the debate, because I think it frames how unionists feel in this. We're being asked to accept something that Irish Republicans and Irish nationalists won't accept. So why should we? So I think what unionists should continue to do is to make the case that Gregory's making is, let's make this place work. We have a compromise. We have a very delicate compromise, the Belfast Agreement. It's not perfect. It works sometimes. It doesn't work at other times. Sometimes it's horrible. Sometimes it can be good and effective. So let's concentrate on making this place work, making the Belfast Agreement work. Let's live up to our obligations that we signed up to under the Belfast Agreement, and then we can talk about all these other things. And I think that's a very positive message that Gregory's been putting. I think one that's very pertinent.
Okay. Speaking of messages from unionism, again, Peter Robinson, using his newsletter columns, which seem to have more and more impact the more they come along. But he was giving kind of, I suppose, a bit of a warning. I suppose you could maybe take it as he was kind of giving a warning toward nationalists who are egging this debate on. And he used the words, he said, take care, and about the fragility of kind of relationships. And interestingly, some senior Southern politicians picked up on the article and actually agreed with it. Former Fine Gael minister Charlie Flanagan was tweeting in support of it. Tim, I want to just stick with you on this, and I'll go to Sarah. What did you make of what he was saying in terms of unionist anxieties and about where we are with relationships?
Well, I think the interesting part in the article for me was towards the end when he said, what people need to realise is this isn't a debate whether unionists and loyalist fears right now are justified or genuine. The fact is they hold them. And that's what needs to be dealt with. And he was making the point that people are ignoring that. They're saying, oh, well, the protocol doesn't do what you say, or, you can still get all your Amazon parcels. What are you complaining about? That's not the point. The point is, it's not whether it's right or wrong that these views are held. It's the fact that they hold these views, and the fact that their legitimacy to hold the views that they have is completely being dispelled, particularly by people down south. I mean, we've mentioned Neil Richmond. He's somebody who's been to the forefront of dismissing genuinely held unionist and loyalist concerns on this, and he's been dispelling them for quite some time. And he's not alone. There's others within the political class within the Republic of Ireland who have been dispelling these genuinely held unionist and loyalist fears, and not just in the Republic of Ireland, politicians here as well. So I think it was a useful contribution from that perspective. But it did seem to me that Peter was talking about all of the, where unionism's at and the message that unionism has, but there didn't seem to be any hint of irony in his writing that he was the leader of unionism for however many years, from 2004 onwards. You could say Peter was the leader of unionism, and certainly when he was first minister from whatever it was, 2008, 2009 onwards. So what was he doing? What's his responsibility for unionism being in the place that it's in right now? And he didn't seem to be very much accepting of any role for himself. He seemed to be saying that that a better case needs to be put by unionists, and that case needs to be listened to by other people. But I just wonder, where's Peter's place in this? It's interesting what you say, that his columns seem to be becoming more and more and more incendiary each time he writes them. More hot potatoes are being dumped into the political process. I think Peter needs to come out from behind the newsletter article and actually give an interview, and let's hear some of these ideas being teased out in that interview. I think he really needs to do that now.
Okay, and of course, Slugger TV is always a great venue for that, Peter. If you're listening,
well, I'm sure, David, you would be the man to tease those hot topics out.
Sarah, what did you take from his article?
Yeah, it was a very interesting article, and I do think Tim's right. I think he was describing unionist and loyalist concerns now and the anger that's out there, and the feelings that the feeling that they're being ignored and not being listened to, and it is correct. Some people have dismissed those concerns. Some people have obviously challenged them, which is very different from dismissing them. I have seen people who have said things like, "Oh, you're getting your Amazon parcels. What are you on about?" Or "This doesn't affect me personally." And it's not really about that. It is just about the union and sovereignty and everything to do with that. And he's right that anger is there and it's bubbling below the surface. And if it's not dealt with and addressed, hopefully, I don't get any sense from anybody that I talk to that they're going to go to violence, but we can't dismiss it out of hand, I think. But there were a couple of things in his article that I did get very frustrated about. For instance, he was right to describe and talk about unionist alienation and anger, and I do think that is very, very real. It was directing the anger at Sinn Féin, and obviously he was talking about his experiences during the Troubles, and I understand what he was saying about what he has been through, but he took aim at Sinn Féin for saying that nationalists are being ignored within the Assembly. This was the same week, about a week, those past couple of days or so, you had somebody come out and saying that maybe an Irish Language Act will not be progressed at the Assembly if the protocol is not removed. He said in his article that they did everything they could to accommodate nationalists and Republicans. I don't think that's true. Mm-hmm. Sorry. And he also said that, that the rights of citizens are being violated. And I have no doubt that is true. Some people feel that very, very strongly. And that feeling is very, very understandable. But, in the same week where the DUP have tried to restrict access to abortion, that are very, very happy to send women and people from this country over to England in dire circumstances to get an abortion, to get access to healthcare that they cannot get at home. I'm sorry, but I don't know how he personally feels about that, but that is very, very frustrating to me, especially as somebody who would declare themselves as a unionist, that Amazon parcels and things like that which I understand why people are angry about that, but can I not get angry in the same way? And if we're going to talk about equal citizenship within the United Kingdom, that is something that needs to be addressed. But that was just my pernickety issues with those aspects of the article. But I think I would have liked to have seen more reflection from him on some of those issues about accommodating nationalists within the Assembly, maybe about the abortion issue, on top of the other arguments he was making about unionist anger and loyalist anger, which is very genuine, and he's right to highlight it. But I think we need to see more from him and more from within unionism itself about those issues, and to understand where the other side is coming from as well. And I think if they did that, they might get more understanding for their position as well.
There is a feeling within the unionist and loyalist community that a lot of concessions have gone one way and there's not a lot of concessions coming back. And I think, again, Sarah says that she would dispute that's a right feeling to hold.
Tim, obviously, Sinn Féin blocked a commemorative stone that was going to commemorate the centenary of Northern Ireland. It was supported by the SDLP and Alliance and obviously the unionist parties. What did you make of that debate? Sinn Féin saying we need to totally re-alter the way we do these things. and there's already enough in Stormont that commemorates unionism. What was your thoughts?
In the context of where we're at right now, I don't think it would have hurt Sinn Féin to show some leadership and to have said, in the grand scheme of things, what does this matter? You know, there's bigger issues coming down the line. Why feed into the perception that's there? And I think it's a validly held perception. I think it's a right perception to hold that it is one-way traffic at the moment. And I think it just feeds into that. And I think it was massively stupid on Sinn Féin's part.
Okay, Sarah, your thoughts quickly on the stone and it being blocked.
Yeah, no, just to respond to that, Tim, no, I get what Tim is saying. I guess where I'm coming from is I think there's misdirection in the sense that I think that sometimes the Nationalists are getting blamed for things which they're not really responsible for, and vice versa, Unionists are blamed for stuff that they're not really responsible for. But the Centenary Stone, yeah, you know, I was disappointed that Sinn Féin didn't vote for it. At the same time, I'm not surprised that they didn't. But I think the SDLP were right to support it. I think they were right that it would have meant a lot to Unionists. It wasn't going to cost the taxpayers any money. It was just the Northern Ireland state itself on a plinth. You know, there was nothing in it that, of course, the Northern Ireland state itself obviously is controversial to Sinn Féin, but you know, I didn't see why they couldn't have just supported that. But I suppose maybe for them that would have been politically problematic. But I do think that the Centenary is a very difficult issue. I do think it is going to be contentious, and we're not all going to agree about it. And I think that's fine. I don't think we should be, you know, trying to make this a moment for reconciliation, everything like that. And while we should certainly not be trying to make this situation worse, I do think it's an opportunity really to listen to one another and understand each other, as opposed to anything else.
Okay, thank you very much for going through those issues. That was a very fast show and we packed a lot in. I want to thank my guests, Tim Cairns and Sarah Creighton. You can keep up to date with everything else in the meantime on sluggerotoole.com. Thank you very much for watching.